You picture the harbour bridge at dawn, Uluru glowing red at dusk, sea turtles drifting through the outer reef. All of that exists exactly as advertised. But Australia is not just a postcard coastline. It is the 6th largest landmass on Earth, stretching from tropical rainforest in the north to ancient southern cliffs, from a chain of coastal cities to desert interiors unchanged in 100 million years. Most visitors see less than 1% of it. This video is about the other 99. 19 places most tourists never reach. Locations that most Australians themselves have only heard of in passing. Places where the land does things you cannot explain, where the silence is so complete it starts to feel like a presence. Towns at the outer edge of what is survivable. Natural formations that science still struggles to account for. Some require serious preparation, 4-wheel drive access, and enough water to survive several days if something goes wrong. Others hide within reach of a sealed road, waiting for someone to ask the right question. None of them appear in the standard travel brochures. All of them will change the way you think about what Australia actually is. Let us start in a desert town where half the population lives underground. Place 1. Coober Pedy, 850 kilometres north of Adelaide in the South Australian desert, sits the strangest town in Australia. The land around Coober Pedy is scarred with more than 1 million mine shafts, many of them unmarked. Visitors are warned not to walk outside designated paths after dark because the ground can disappear beneath you without warning. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius, and yet 3,500 people live here permanently. Most of them underground, in hand-carved sandstone homes called dugouts. There are underground churches, underground hotels, an underground bar, and an underground bookshop. The temperature below the surface holds at a constant 23 degrees, regardless of what the sun is doing above. Coober Pedy produces roughly 70% of the world's supply of precious opals. Miners from more than 45 nationalities have come here chasing a stone that shifts between every colour in the spectrum, depending on how light catches it. The name comes from Arabana Aboriginal words meaning white man in a hole. Place 2. Lake Hillier. Off the south coast of Western Australia, accessible only by small aircraft or boat, Middle Island sits within the Recherche Archipelago. From above, it looks like a typical stretch of Australian coastal bush pressing against a white sand strip. Until you see the lake. Lake Hillier is bubblegum pink. Not pink the way a sunrise colours still water for a few minutes. Solid, permanent, year-round bubblegum pink, bordered by white salt crust and a belt of eucalyptus trees running to the shoreline. Even when you pour the water into a glass, it stays pink. Scientists attribute the colour to halophilic bacteria and an algae species called Dunaliella salina, both thriving in extreme salt conditions similar to the Dead Sea. The colour has not changed since British explorer Matthew Flinders charted the island in 1802. He named it after his ship's surgeon, William Hillier, who died here during that same voyage. Place 3. Mungo National Park. In the far southwest corner of New South Wales, a dried lake bed stretches across the Red Plain like something left behind by a civilization that never existed. At the eastern edge of Mungo National Park stands the Walls of China, a crescent ridge of lunette dunes rising up to 33 metres from the flat ground surrounding them. Wind has sculpted the dunes into pillars, arches, and channels that shift every time a storm passes through. Walking among them in the early morning, with long shadows cutting between the formations, feels less like hiking and more like moving through a place you have no frame of reference for. What makes Mungo genuinely remarkable is not the landscape. It is what lies beneath it. In 1974, researchers found the remains of a man cremated and buried here approximately 42,000 years ago, one of the earliest documented examples of human burial ritual found anywhere on Earth. A few years earlier, a woman's remains were found nearby, showing evidence of deliberate ochre burial ceremony dating back 40,000 years. Place 4. The Bungles. Most travellers who reach the Western Australian Kimberley spend their time in Broome. A smaller number make the additional commitment to reach Purnululu National Park, accessible only via rough four-wheel drive track during the dry season between April and November. The reward is the Bungle Range. From the ground, these formations appear as rounded sandstone towers striped in alternating bands of orange and dark grey. The orange is silica. The dark grey is cyanobacteria, an ancient microorganism sealed into the stone surface. Up close, the towers look almost soft, like stacked cushions. The outer crust is extremely fragile, which is why the park strictly controls where visitors may walk. The Bungles cover 45,000 hectares. For most of the 20th century, they were unknown outside the local Gija community, who had lived here for tens of thousands of years. The wider world became aware of them only after a documentary crew flew over the area in 1983. A World Heritage Site hidden from most of humanity for most of recorded history. Place 5. Dalhousie Springs. Drive far enough north through South Australia, past Coober Pedy, past the Dingo Fence, past the last sealed road, and you reach Murujuga National Park. Inside, fed by the Great Artesian Basin running beneath much of the outback, are the Dalhousie Springs. More than 60 individual mound springs bubble up from the earth here year-round. The main pool sits at around 38 degrees Celsius. You can float in it on a clear night with nothing overhead except the Milky Way, and no artificial light within 200 kilometers in any direction. The springs support freshwater fish species found nowhere else on Earth, several varieties that evolved in total isolation over thousands of years as the desert dried around them. Getting here requires a full fuel load, a recovery kit, and respect for road conditions that become impassable after rain. The nearest services are in Oodnadatta, over 200 kilometers southeast. What you get is warm water rising from ancient rock and a silence with genuine physical weight. Place 6. Innamincka. In 1861, the Burke and Wills expedition reached Cooper Creek in far northeast South Australia. They had crossed the continent from Melbourne, the first Europeans to do so. They also died here, only days away from rescue, in a failure that is still taught in Australian schools as one of the great tragedies of exploration. Today, Innamincka sits near that same stretch of Cooper Creek with a permanent population of around 15. A general store, a hotel, and a national park covering the surrounding country. When the creek flows, it creates a ribbon of green through the stony desert. Coolabah trees line the banks. Pelicans gather at the waterholes. In good flood years, water pushes south from Queensland and the creek runs wide and brown and full of life. Every Australian schoolchild knows the names Burke and Wills. Very few have stood where they actually died. The memorial cairn sits in the scrub, 8 kilometres from town. A small sign, the creek, the Coolabah trees, and the silence. Place 7. Litchfield National Park. About 115 kilometres south of Darwin, most travellers seeking waterfalls and ancient landscapes in the Northern Territory book Kakadu, which is world famous and deserves it. Litchfield, 40 minutes from Darwin with no permit required, offers something different. The park covers 1,500 square kilometres of sandstone plateau, monsoon forest, and open woodland. 4 separate waterfall systems, each ending in clear plunge pools. Florence Falls, Wungie Falls, Tolma Falls, and Bewley Rockhole cover every level of fitness and ambition. What makes Litchfield genuinely distinctive is the magnetic termite mounds. Across one section of the park, thousands of tall, flat-sided mounds rise from the ground, all aligned precisely on a north-south axis. The termites orient the broad face to catch morning and afternoon sun while the narrow edge faces north, reducing heat exposure during the hottest hours. Place 8. Bujamulla, also known as Lawn Hill Gorge. In the far northwest corner of Queensland, accessible via rough, unsealed road that most rental companies will void your insurance for using, a sandstone gorge cuts through the flat Mitchell grass plains with no warning from the landscape around it. Bujamulla National Park contains Lawn Hill Gorge, where underground springs have carved a canyon up to 60 meters deep through red sandstone. Date palms and native figs line the banks. The water is clear, green, and cold even in the middle of summer. You can hire a canoe at the park headquarters and paddle directly into the gorge, moving between walls, rising high above you, while freshwater crocodiles watch from the shaded banks. Freshwater crocodiles are not dangerous to people the way their saltwater relatives are, but watching one slide into the water beside your canoe rearranges your sense of ease. The surrounding region also holds the Riversley Fossil Field, one of the world's most significant paleontological sites, where ancient Australian megafauna lie preserved in limestone. Place 9. Valley of the Giants. About 400 kilometres south of Perth, in Walpole Nornalup National Park, a eucalyptus species called the red tingle grows to dimensions that challenge your understanding of what a tree can be. Red tingles reach 40 metres in height with a base circumference of over 24 metres. The oldest individuals are believed to be up to 400 years old. They grow only in a narrow strip of southern Western Australia, in a pocket of high rainfall that suits their requirements and nowhere else on the continent. The treetop walk takes visitors through the canopy at 40 metres above the forest floor, on suspended steel walkways engineered to flex and sway slightly with the wind. The ancient Empire Trail below passes tingle trees with cavities large enough for a person to stand inside, hollowed out by centuries of fire and decay. Place 10. Cossack. In 1863, a settlement was established on the northwest coast of Western Australia to service the pastoral stations pushing into the Pilbara. By 1910, it was abandoned. The pearling industry had moved to Broome, the supply ships had stopped coming, and the population drifted away. Today, Cossack is a ghost town, preserved as a heritage site. The original stone buildings still stand along the mangrove-lined Tidal Creek. The old post office, the courthouse, the lockup, the bond store along the waterfront. All intact, all empty. Walking through Cossack in the late afternoon, when the creek turns gold and the heat begins to ease, is a peculiar experience. The buildings feel inhabited. The silence says otherwise. Almost nobody makes it to that turnoff. Place 11. Silverton. About 25 kilometres northwest of Broken Hill in outback New South Wales, a town that once held 3,000 people now holds around 50. Silverton boomed in the 1880s on silver and lead. When the ore ran out, the people left. The stone buildings stayed. What separates Silverton from most ghost towns is that filmmakers found it before it fell into obscurity. Mad Max 2 was filmed in the red desert surrounding the town, and those flat plains became the post-apocalyptic highway of the film's most iconic sequences. A small museum maintains memorabilia from various productions. The pub still operates. The interior walls are covered floor to ceiling in business cards left by visiting travellers going back decades. A handful of working artists maintain studios along the main street. Silverton sits within range of Broken Hill, which carries one of the longest-running regional art scenes in Australia, fed by the extraordinary quality of light that comes off the red soil and grey sky of the far west. Place 12. Lightning Ridge. 77 kilometres east of the Queensland border in northern New South Wales, a town of roughly 3,000 people sits above a deposit of black opal that has no equivalent anywhere on Earth. Black opal forms when silica gel seeps into rock cavities and crystallizes over millions of years against a dark backing that intensifies the color play. The result shifts through electric blue, deep red, green, and gold as you tilt it in the light. No other opal deposit produces this effect at this quality and scale. Mine shafts cover the landscape for kilometres in every direction. Residents have built underground homes and eccentric community spaces using the same excavation methods as the mining operations. The Chambers of the Black Hand is a series of underground tunnels decorated with carvings by a German-born miner who spent decades inscribing his life story into the stone walls beneath the town. You can buy rough opal from working miners or lease a small claim yourself. Most people driving this part of New South Wales do not stop. Place 13. Birdsville. The Birdsville track runs 517 kilometres from Eyre in South Australia north to Birdsville in the far southwest corner of Queensland, through the Thanda-Lake desert and channel country along a route cattle drovers used for over a century. Birdsville has a permanent population of approximately 140 people, a bakery, a pub, a small airport, and a caravan park. Once a year, in early September, the Birdsville races draw thousands of visitors for a horse racing event running since 1882, considered one of the great outback Australian traditions. The town population multiplies by roughly 50 over race weekend, with planes arriving from across the country and campgrounds stretching far beyond the town limits. For the other 51 weeks, Birdsville sits at the gateway to the Simpson Desert with the silence coming in from every horizon. The Birdsville Hotel was built in 1884 and has been serving cold beer to people who very badly need it ever since. Place 14. Ningaloo Reef. The Great Barrier Reef receives all the attention. Ningaloo Reef runs for 260 kilometres along the Western Australian coast, roughly 1,200 kilometres north of Perth, close enough to shore that in some places you walk directly into it from the beach. Between March and July each year, whale sharks, the largest fish species on Earth, gather in Ningaloo waters to feed on the mass coral spawning event. They reach 12 metres in length. Swimming alongside one requires no cage and no specialised certification, just a snorkel and the willingness to share the ocean with something the size of a bus. Ningaloo also hosts manta rays, humpback whales, loggerhead turtles, and dugongs in concentrations rarely matched anywhere this accessible to ordinary visitors. The western coast of Australia simply does not have the marketing resources of the eastern seaboard. That is the only reason more people have not been here. Place 15. Point Labatt. On a remote stretch of South Australia's Eyre Peninsula, low limestone cliffs drop to a rocky platform above the cold southern ocean. There is no nearby town. The sealed road out from Streaky Bay carries light traffic. At the base of those cliffs, on a permanent year-round basis, lives Australia's only mainland colony of Australian sea lions. The colony numbers between 50 and 80 individuals depending on the season. You can watch them from the cliff top, close enough for clear observation without disturbing the animals. Sea lions have a dog-like quality of curiosity and social noise. They argue over rocks, shove each other, and haul themselves from the water with a combination of grace and total undignified effort. Australian sea lions are one of the rarest seal species in the world, breeding only at specific South and West Australian sites. The population is listed as endangered. Point Labatt has a viewing platform, an interpretive board, and a car park. No entrance fee. Most people driving the Eyre Peninsula Loop miss the turn-off. Place 16. Kati Thanda, also known as Lake Eyre. In the lowest point of the Australian continent, 113 metres below average national elevation, sits a salt lake covering approximately 9,300 square kilometres when empty. When it fills, which happens rarely and never fully predictably, it becomes the largest lake in Australia. Kati Thanda draws its water from a vast catchment across Queensland and New South Wales. When heavy rain falls over that catchment, water moves slowly through desert river systems, including the Diamantina and Cooper Creek, traveling weeks to reach the lake. If enough arrives, the transformation is striking. The salt crust softens under the inflow. Sediment blooms pink and gold beneath the spreading water. Pelicans, banded stilts, and waterbirds arrive in hundreds of thousands, somehow sensing the filling event from enormous distances. They breed on temporary islands while the water lasts. Then the lake dries and goes back to white. The last significant filling events were in 2009 and 2010. Donald Campbell set his land speed record attempts on this surface during the 1960s, when the flat salt stretched to every horizon. Place 17, Marble Bar. 200 kilometres south of Port Hedland into the Pilbara, the landscape becomes ancient banded ironstone country, red rock country, terrain that communicates heat through its colour before you have opened the car door. Marble Bar holds the record for Australia's longest documented heat wave. Between October 1923 and April 1924, the town recorded maximum temperatures above 37.7 degrees Celsius for 160 consecutive days. The town is not named after the mineral. It is named after a bar of coloured jasper crossing the Kungun River nearby, which early settlers mistook for marble. About 200 people currently live here. The surrounding Pilbara contains some of the oldest exposed rock on the surface of the earth. The banded ironstone formations in the region date back approximately 3 billion years. Place 18. Murujuga, the Dampier Rock Art. On the Burrup Peninsula near Dampier in Western Australia, now surrounded by some of the world's largest concentrations of heavy industrial infrastructure, lies the largest collection of ancient rock engravings found anywhere on Earth. Murujuga National Park contains an estimated 1 million individual petroglyphs carved into the dark surface of granite boulders by Aboriginal people across a period extending back at least 46,000 years. Some images depict animals now completely extinct, including the thylacine and megafauna that disappeared from mainland Australia thousands of years ago. Human figures, animal tracks, fish, faces, and geometric patterns look out from the dark stone across every boulder in the area. Reaching the national park requires navigating past ammonia plants, gas facilities, and port operations that now surround it. The contrast between what is 46,000 years old and what was built within living memory is one of the most disorienting things you can stand inside in Australia. Place 19. Tibooburra. In the far corner country of northwest New South Wales, where the borders of Queensland, South Australia, and New South Wales converge across a flat plain of gibber rock and red dust, sits a town called Tibooburra. The permanent population is approximately 150 people. The drive from Broken Hill takes about 3 hours on unsealed road in dry conditions. After rain, the road can close entirely. Tibooburra is not famous for any single landmark. What it offers is harder to name. The sense of being genuinely at the edge of things. Sturt's stony desert presses north and west in every direction. The light at dusk over the Gibber Plain is a specific deep amber red that photographers travel enormous distances to attempt and still cannot fully reproduce on screen. The Family Hotel carries murals painted by artists from the Bushmen of the Bush movement, which brought serious artistic intention to outback New South Wales from the 1970s onward. Tibooburra is the kind of place where you stop because the road ends and the sky demands your full attention. Australia has hundreds of places like this. Places where the continent reveals its actual scale, its actual age, its complete indifference to the idea that you need to be comfortable in order to be present. 19 places, 1 continent, 1,000 more waiting in every direction that nobody has thought to show you yet.